Imagine that the core practices of, well, a faith followed by billions across the globe could be distilled into just 5 key actions.
Yeah.
Pretty surprising, right?
Yeah.
Today, that's exactly what we're diving into, the fascinating world of the 5 pillars of Islam.
Absolutely. You've shared with us Imara chapter 9, and it's a really illuminating exploration of the theological underpinnings of Islam. And, how those beliefs actually manifest in everyday life through these 5 essential practices.
Right.
What makes this chapter particularly valuable, I think, is how it shows us the dynamic relationship between, well, belief and action.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, our aim is to go beyond just, listing these pillars.
Sure.
We want to really understand their significance within the Islamic tradition and maybe touch on some of the intriguing nuances and even the ongoing conversations around them.
Good plan.
Okay, let's get started with what many consider the very heart of Islam. The Shahada.
The Shahada, yeah. The Declaration of Faith definitely holds that central position. In its simplest form, it states, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah.
Such a concise statement.
It is, and it really encapsulates the entire Islamic belief system.
And it's not just a statement you can casually utter, is it? The source points out that sincerely reciting it is the very act that marks someone as a Muslim.
That's key.
It even mentions rida, which is the withdrawal of that belief, a concept carrying, well, significant weight.
Indeed. Its centrality is fundamental. The chapter quotes Muhammad Ali, a scholar, who aptly describes it as a succinct summary of Islam. He emphasizes that it's through this very testimony to the oneness of God and the prophethood of Muhammad that one actually enters the Muslim community.
It's interesting, too, that the chapter notes the full Shahada isn't found word for word in a single Quranic verse.
Right, not in one block.
Yet its core components are clearly present in passages like Quran 9.31 and 33.40. It's like the building blocks are there,
That's a crucial observation. The elements are definitely there. And its profound importance is further highlighted by the hadith mentioned, where the Prophet Muhammad states that reciting the Shahada sincerely can be a means of salvation.
Wow.
That really underscores its theological weight.
It's almost like the ultimate statement of commitment, then. The chapter also draws an interesting parallel for us, comparing it to the Apostles' Creed or maybe the Great Commandment in Christianity.
Exactly. These brief declarations that capture the essence of the respective faiths.
Yeah.
They serve that same kind of foundational purpose.
Right.
And in the daily life of a Muslim, the Shahada is just ever present.
How so?
Well, it's recited during the 5 daily prayers. It's offered as a renewal of faith after any perceived wrongdoing.
Okay.
And it's even whispered to newborns and those nearing the end of life. It's deeply, deeply ingrained.
So after establishing that core belief, that bedrock, we move to the second pillar. Salat.
Salat, yes, the prescribed ritual of Islamic prayer and worship.
The source notes that while the Quran gives sort of general guidance on prayer, the specific number, the 5 daily prayers, that comes from the Hadith tradition.
That's a common dynamic. You see, the Quran sets out the principles, and the Hadith often provides the detailed practices.
I see.
The chapter also emphasizes the value placed on praying in congregation at a mosque whenever feasible.
The communal aspect.
Yeah, highlighting that communal aspect of worship.
And each of these prayer times is announced by the beautiful sound of the adhan, the call to prayer. The chapter actually lists the phrases, and what's striking is how the Shahada is woven right into it.
It is, isn't it?
You hear, Allah is most great, then I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, repeated.
It's a constant echo of that fundamental belief throughout the day. It really shows how this core tenet underpins even the daily rituals.
Yeah.
However, the chapter also provides a crucial counterpoint by quoting Quran 2.177.
Yeah, what does that say?
It basically cautions against mere rote performance of these rituals.
Right.
Just going through the motions.
Right.
It reminds us that true righteousness lies beyond just the physical acts of prayer.
It's about the intention and the inner state, not just the mechanics.
Exactly. But the source also explains that Muslims believe the physical elements of prayer, things like the purification rituals, the specific postures, even the clothing, can actually aid in fostering a deeper connection with God.
Okay, so the physical can support the spiritual.
Precisely. It's as if the physical acts can help focus the spiritual intention.
That makes sense.
And beyond these 5 obligatory prayers, the chapter mentions other forms of personal and communal prayer, like dua, which are personal supplications.
Okay.
Tahajjud, those are voluntary night prayers, Taraweeh during Ramadan, and of course the significant Friday Juma prayer.
So a rich landscape of devotion.
It really is a varied landscape.
The motivations behind these prayers are quite interesting, too. The chapter mentions seeking baraka blessing. Blessings, yes. For things like deliverance, provision, acceptance of good deeds. It makes you think about the practical ways faith intertwines with everyday needs and aspirations.
Absolutely. And here's a fascinating distinction the chapter draws out.
Oh.
While in Christianity, prayer is often understood primarily as fostering a direct personal relationship with God. In Islam, while that personal connection isn't absent, salat is often framed more as a duty that defines one's righteousness within the community and before Allah.
A slightly different emphasis. Duty and righteousness.
Exactly. It's a different framing of the purpose of prayer compared to some other traditions.
Okay, let's move on then to the third pillar.
Zakah.
Zakah, which is described as an obligatory act of charity, a prescribed giving that functions, well, somewhat like a wealth tax.
Yeah, that's a decent way to put it. The chapter points out that the standard amount is generally 2.5% of one's wealth and possessions,
Okay.
which is calculated differently, as you noted, than the traditional 10% tithe on income you might find in, say, the Old Testament.
Right, wealth versus income. That's a key difference.
Yes, it's a levy on accumulated wealth rather than just earnings. And the chapter highlights the historical significance of Zakah, too.
How so?
It mentions the early disputes surrounding it, particularly the Ridda Wars,
Yeah.
which really underscores how central and, frankly, sometimes contentious this practice has been right from the beginnings of Islam.
It's intriguing how the Quran connects the concept of predestination, or qadr, with zakah.
Tell us more.
Well, the idea is that since everything ultimately comes from Allah,
Right.
giving back a portion is a way of acknowledging that divine provision and expressing gratitude. Verses like Quran 2.254 and 35.29 are cited to illustrate this connection.
That's a core principle. Muslims view their wealth not as solely their own, but more like a trust from God.
A trust, okay.
Therefore, the act of giving zakah is seen as a form of worship and also a means of spiritual purification.
And the chapter also emphasizes the frequent pairing of zakah with salah in the Quran.
Yes, very often together, highlighting them as intertwined expressions of piety and devotion.
And it's remarkable how often zakah is mentioned in the Quran. The source says it's referenced in almost every surah.
It really is pervasive, underscoring its fundamental importance within the faith.
It even points to Quran 9.5, linking the performance of prayers and the payment of zakah with, well, a sense of security and acceptance within the community.
The sheer frequency of its mention truly speaks volumes about its significance in the Islamic worldview.
Definitely.
The chapter also makes a useful distinction between zakah, the obligatory part, and sadaqah.
Which is?
Sadaqah is voluntary charity, seen as an additional way to demonstrate sincerity and faith going above and beyond the requirement.
Got it.
And there's that Quranic verse, 51.92, that's brought up. It states that the poor have a recognized right to a share of the wealth of the more fortunate.
Right, not just charity.
Exactly. A concept that the chapter suggests might help explain the presence of those seeking alms outside mosques sometimes. It reframes charity not just as, an act of generosity, but almost as a matter of social justice within the community.
That's a powerful perspective. Okay, let's delve into the fourth pillar, Psalm.
Psalm, the fasting during Ramadan.
The obligatory fasting observed during the month of Ramadan. This involves abstaining from food, drink, and other physical pleasures from sunrise until sunset.
That's correct. And the chapter emphasizes the crucial element of niyyah.
Intention.
Yes, the intention that must be declared before dawn each day to undertake the fast. You can't just accidentally fast. It has to be deliberate.
Right. And the pre-dawn meal is known as sahur.
Sahur.
And the meal that breaks the fast at sunset is called iftar.
Iftar, yes. Offered a communal meal.
And the culmination of this month-long period of fasting is a significant celebration.
Huge celebration, marked by the sighting of the new moon and the joyous festival of Eid al-Fitr.
Eid al-Fitr.
Exactly. The chapter quotes Quran 2.185, which outlines the obligation of fasting, but also provides exemptions for those who are ill or traveling.
Okay, practical considerations.
Yes. And importantly, it highlights the profound significance of Ramadan as the month in which the Quran was first revealed.
The month of revelation.
That's its primary significance.
Ramadan takes place in the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar, right?
Correct, the 9th month. And the source points out the widespread belief among Muslims that Allah is particularly close and readily forgiving during this sacred time.
So a special period.
Very much so. Seen as a period of heightened spiritual awareness, discipline, and introspection.
A time for drawing closer to God.
Yes, precisely. Now that brings us to the fifth and final pillar, Hajj.
The pilgrimage to Mecca. This is a truly significant undertaking.
It really is. Required of all able-bodied Muslims who can afford it, at least once in their lifetime.
Once in a lifetime. The chapter notes that it takes place during the 10th to 12th months of the Islamic calendar.
That's the specific season for it.
Right.
And the Hajj is just deeply interwoven with the history of Islam. It carries profound connections to the Prophet Abraham and the construction of the Kaaba.
Right, the story of Abraham.
And the story of the miraculous well of Zamzam that sustained Hagar and Ishmael.
Yes.
And the Prophet Muhammad's subsequent rededication of the Kaaba to monotheism. These are all central to its meaning.
And the Kaaba itself described as the most sacred site in Islam.
The most sacred, often referred to as the house of Allah.
And it serves as the direction, the Qibla, that Muslims face during their daily prayers, no matter where they are in the world.
Correct. It unifies the community and prayer globally.
So the chapter then meticulously details the key rituals of the Hajj, starting about 5 miles outside Mecca.
Yes, that's where pilgrims enter a state of ihram.
Ihram, what does that involve?
It's symbolized by wearing 2 simple, seamless white cloths. Men, that is. Women have specific modest dress, too.
Okay.
And they declare their specific intention for the pilgrimage. This act of stripping away worldly adornments signifies unity and equality before God.
A powerful symbol. And the first major ritual is tawaf.
Tawaf, yes. The act of circling the Kaaba 7 times in a counterclockwise direction.
Counterclockwise.
The chapter notes the tradition of walking briskly for the first 3 circuits, then at a more leisurely pace for the final 4.
Okay.
And that's followed by prayer at the site believed to be where Abraham and Ishmael rebuilt the Kaaba.
Wow. Then following this is the Sa'i.
Yeah. The ritual of walking or running 7 times between the hills of Safa and Marwa.
And this commemorates Hagar's search for water.
Exactly. Her desperate search for water for her son Ishmael, a search that miraculously led to the discovery of the Zamzam well.
A testament to God's provision.
Absolutely, in times of need.
Next, the pilgrim's journey to Muzdalifah.
Correct. There they gather small pebbles that will be used later in the stoning ritual,
Okay.
and they spend the night in prayer and reflection.
Then comes the pivotal day of Arafah.
Yes, on the 9th of Dhul-Hijjah. Pilgrims gather on the plains of Arafat for intense prayer and supplication.
This is considered the heart of the Hajj.
It really is. It commemorates the Prophet Muhammad's final sermon delivered there and involves wukuf, a prolonged standing vigil seeking forgiveness with a strong belief that Allah is especially close on this day.
Intense.
Very. Then the stoning of the Jamarat is another significant ritual.
The pillars symbolizing the devil.
Precisely. Pilgrims throw 7 pebbles at each of these pillars, recalling Abraham's steadfast resistance to Satan's temptations.
Okay.
The chapter also notes that animal sacrifice is recommended at this stage, echoing Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Ishmael, though Allah provided a ram instead.
Right. The story of sacrifice and provision again.
The chapter continues outlining the return to Mina for further stoning rituals, the celebration of Eid al-Adha on the 10th.
Eid al-Adha, the festival of sacrifice.
Yes, which includes the symbolic sacrifice, and finally the farewell tawaf around the Kaaba before departing.
It's a deeply symbolic and, well, physically demanding journey.
Extremely. And the chapter emphasizes the primary motivations behind undertaking it. The profound desire to seek forgiveness from Allah and to gain His favor.
Forgiveness and favor.
Yes. It even mentions a hadith stating that a person who performs the Hajj properly returns as pure as a newborn, free from sin.
Incredible.
And the deeply held belief that dying during the Hajj actually guarantees paradise further underscores its immense spiritual significance for Muslims.
Now, the chapter then delves into a discussion about what it terms a questionable 6th pillar.
Ah, yes, jihad.
Jihad. This is undoubtedly a term that evokes, well, strong reactions and carries a complex history.
Absolutely. The chapter rightly addresses the common non-Muslim association of jihad with holy war and, unfortunately, the actions of terrorist groups.
Yeah.
However, it's really essential to recognize the multifaceted nature of this concept and the diverse interpretations it has held throughout Islamic history. It's not monolithic.
Right. So the source presents a common distinction between 2 understandings of jihad.
It does. The moderate view often differentiates between the greater jihad,
Okay.
which is understood as the internal personal struggle against one's own negative inclinations,
Right.
ego, desires.
The inner struggle.
Exactly. And the lesser jihad, which is the external physical struggle. And importantly, in this view, it's seen as defensive and subject to strict ethical guidelines.
Defensive and regulated.
Yes. The hadith that speaks of returning from the minor jihad to the major jihad is often cited to support this view, prioritizing the inner struggle.
Okay.
This moderate perspective frequently emphasizes Quranic verses like 2.256, which states, "There shall be no compulsion in acceptance of the religion."
No compulsion.
And it draws parallels to the concept of just self-defense in various contexts,
Yeah.
even referencing the historical period of the Crusades as an example of defensive struggle.
Right. But the chapter also presents the fundamentalist viewpoint.
It does. This view tends to assert that only Muslims have the authority to define Islam and often prioritizes the meaning of submission inherent in the word Islam over interpretations, emphasizing peace. They might argue submission sometimes requires struggle.
And this perspective often draws upon specific hadith.
Yes, such as the one found in Bukhari and Muslim that speaks of fighting until people testify to the Islamic creed, establish prayer, and pay zakat.
Okay.
They also cite Quranic verses like 9.5 and 9.29, which contain directives to fight against certain groups in specific historical contexts as justification for a more, let's say, expansive understanding of armed struggle.
So how do moderates address those verses?
Well, moderate scholars often attempt to contextualize these seemingly more forceful verses
How?
by arguing that they were specific to the historical circumstances of the Prophet Muhammad's time.
Okay, context specific.
Yes, drawing parallels perhaps to instances of divinely sanctioned warfare you might find in the Old Testament, and by employing the principle of abrogation.
Abrogation?
The idea that later revelations in the Quran can supersede or clarify earlier ones. So peaceful verses might abrogate earlier, more context-specific fighting verses, or vice versa, depending on interpretation.
Okay, I see. But the chapter also highlights the fundamentalist critique of these moderate interpretations.
It does. They often point to the historical reality that military conflicts continued within the early Islamic community after Muhammad's time.
Right.
And they question the application of abrogation, sometimes arguing that some of the verses cited to support armed struggle actually appear later in the chronological order of Quranic revelation, not earlier.
So the chronology complicates the abrogation argument for some.
Exactly. It makes it a point of ongoing debate. This whole discussion surrounding the meaning and application of jihad undeniably presents significant challenges for the Muslim world today.
It sounds very complex.
It is. And the chapter astutely notes the resulting discontent and even the departure of some moderate Muslims who are troubled by interpretations that seemingly justify violence.
Yeah.
It's a complex and deeply sensitive issue with a wide spectrum of understanding.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, let's quickly recap those essential elements. The 5 pillars of Islam are the Shahada, the declaration of faith,
The core belief.
Salat, the 5 daily prayers,
The ritual worship.
Zakah, the obligatory charitable giving,
Sharing well.
Samta, the fasting during Ramadan,
Spiritual discipline.
and Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca.
The journey of a lifetime.
These are the fundamental practices that shape the religious life of Muslims. And then we've explored the complex and often debated concept of jihad.
Right. And understanding these pillars really gives you, I think, a powerful lens through which to understand the daily lives and core convictions of Muslims worldwide.
It does feel that way.
What's particularly striking, maybe, is the intricate balance between personal devotion and communal responsibility that these practices embody.
Yeah.
The differing emphasis on duty versus personal relationship and prayer, the sheer prominence of zakah in the Quranic text, and the rich historical and symbolic layers embedded in the Hajj rituals. These are all incredibly thought-provoking aspects, aren't they?
They really are. It truly does offer a deeper appreciation for the lived experience of faith. And it leaves you pondering, when we consider these concrete expressions of faith across various religious traditions, how does that deepen our understanding of humanity's shared yet uniquely expressed search for meaning and purpose?
That's a great question.
Or perhaps considering the internal dialogues and varying interpretations within religious traditions, like the ongoing discussions around jihad, how do sacred texts and practices get interpreted and reinterpreted across different times and contexts?
Yeah, how does tradition live and evolve? Definitely some important things to keep in mind and maybe explore further on your own.